for our webinar on opportunities for fintech to scale up finance for clean energy. I'm Amy Bertoli from the Strategic Initiatives Office of the International Energy Agency, and I'm joined by my colleague Vida Rosite, who will help moderate the Q&A session, and by Olivier Parada and Josie Dungeon, who are supporting us behind the scenes. I hope that you, your families and friends are well and remain so. We are in an unprecedented situation. The IEA is hard at work on developing analyses and policies recommendations to support governments, especially on how the economic stimulus can be used to support clean energy transitions. We are also continuing to focus our work on digitalisation and power system modernization and how to ensure efficient operation and continued resilience of power systems. This is our webinar number 7 in the series on modernizing energy efficiency through digitalization, where we're focusing on how digital solutions can make end-use efficiency cheaper, easier, and more appealing across sectors, how they can make policy making more effective through access to more granular data, new types of data, and advanced analytics, and how digital technologies can promote energy efficiency across systems, including electricity systems. So in our recent analysis, we're seeing that energy efficiency investment is not enough to meet sustainability goals. However, there seems to be a high potential for energy efficiency investments that remains untapped in many countries. As we'll see today and in this context, fintech can offer an opportunity to leverage digitalization and overcome a range of persistent barriers in this sphere. So if we go back to the agenda, we can see that in today's webinar, we will have the opportunity to explore how digital technologies are supporting the development of new financing vehicles for renewables and on their potential applicability for finance energy efficiency projects as well. And experts will also explain how blockchain technology can revolutionize the green bond market and how countries like Indonesia are actually applying these technologies to attract and raise capital for new investors. So the presentations will be followed by a question and answer session and interval with interactive polling to make the discussion more dynamic. You will see on your right the settings, and please use the questions chat box in your control panel to ask for any questions. We will select and read them out at the end of the presentations. Of course, we will not mention the names of people asking questions, so please feel free also to use this opportunity to suggest further topics or aspects that you would like to hear more about in future webinars. Let me also remind you that the webinar is recorded and the recording and the presentations will be available online. We'll send you an email with the link in the coming days. Now, as you can see from this slide, the first one is me, and then I would add a few words on our esteemed speakers that we thank for being with us today, starting with Cecilia. So Cecilia heads up the OECD Clean Energy Finance and Investment Mobilization Program. This new program works with emerging economies to help strengthen their enabling frameworks to facilitate more private sector finance and investment in energy efficiency and renewable energy. And today she will provide a framing on this topic. Now, if we move on to the next slide, we'll see our guest speakers, starting with Marianne Haar, who is the Director of Green Energy Digital Finance Alliance, which has the objective to harness fintech to unlock financing for SDGs and the Paris Agreement. This is a public-private partnership between UNEP and Ant Financial Services Group. And Marianne will guide us through how digitalization can help to scale up and lower the costs of green bonds, including the role it could play in energy efficiency finance. Then Jacob is the co-founder of Kotakal Business Solutions, a design firm using technology to address sustainable development goals. In the renewable energy space, the firm has been working on blockchain in relation with green projects, green bonds, and with energy tokenization. This pioneering work includes combining blockchain and IoT devices while integrating to the electric grid and he will guide us through how this technology works. And last but not least, we were welcoming Dwi Riantian in India, who is Director of Islamic Financing at the Directorate General of Budget Financing and Risk Management, Ministry of Finance of the Republic of Indonesia. And she is experienced in the field of Indonesia capital market, regulation and law, and she's been involved in the development of Sukuk Negara from the beginning. So today we're really excited to hear about her experience in implementing retail green Sukuk in Indonesia. And now, before passing the floor to Cecilia, I'd actually like to get a quick picture of who is with us today. So if we move to the next slide, I would kindly ask you to go to www.menti.com. You will see there, you can use both your phone or your computer, and you can see on the screen a code. So please insert the code that you will see shortly on the web page. And I will also ask you, let's say, to keep this web page open, because we will be using this tool throughout our presentation in order to make the discussion hopefully more dynamic. So please, the code is 203273. Of course, these options don't include all different kinds of organization, but please do choose the one which is more, let's say, similar to yours. So with we're starting to see that we have a lot of people with us especially from research NGOs and international organizations, but also the finance sector, more and more from the technology provider and other industries. So this is interesting because it gives us the information that actually our audience is quite diverse. So thank you for being with us. We will wait for a couple of seconds here, and then we will move on to the next question. All right, so we can see here that our main, let's say, organization across the table are more research, NGOs, international organizations, but also government and technology. So yeah, really interesting to have a quite diverse mix. So we can now move to the next question. So we would also like to know from you, and also to give a context related to this webinar related on what is the maturity level of fintech for clean energy finance in your jurisdiction. Of course, we start to none, so no transactions are actually completed, nascent with a first or some of the first transactions happening, and growing number. So again, what is interesting to see here is that actually we have a quite broad, let's say, set of maturity levels, and which is quite balanced as well. All right, so we will allow a couple of seconds more for you to answer before moving on to the next speaker. All right, so what we can see is that for 18 among you, the fintech for clean energy finance is actually non-existent. So it might be interesting for you, let's say, to see how this can actually be implemented and provide opportunities. And actually, for the majority of you, this is in a nascent phase, which is understandable. Like, there are a lot of experiments happening in several countries, and you will see from the experience of Indonesia and also hearing about the general framework how this can actually be implemented and scaled up. And we're happy also to see that for 24 of you, like, you live in a jurisdiction where, let's say, this kind of framework is actually growing and a number of players are becoming established in this market. Okay, now, thank you all for taking time to answer these questions. We will have more, as I said, during the presentation. And now I will pass the floor to Cecilia to give us a general intro and framing. So the floor is yours, Cecilia.
Thank you very much, Emmy. And I'd like to also just add my welcome to the participants of this webinar. We at the OECD are very pleased to be part of the IEA's digitalization series of webinars, and thank the IEA team for inviting us to co-host today's session. Can I have the next slide, please? For those of you who may not be familiar with the OECD, we are an intergovernmental organization that, we are the only intergovernmental organization that works across all branches of government. We support our governments in building better policies for better lives. Our Center for Green Finance and Investment provides cutting-edge analysis to support policy making and organizes the annual Forum on Green Finance and Investment, which will be held this year on 8 and 9 October. The center leverages the OECD's policy and economics expertise and provides a global platform for engagement among leaders from industry, finance, government, and regulatory institutions, academia, and civil society. Next slide, please. Today's webinar is part of the OECD's Clean Energy Finance and Investment Mobilization Program, which is an activity of the Center for Green Finance and Investment. This program, supported by the government of Denmark, works closely with emerging economies to help improve their policy framework for clean energy finance and investment. Its four main activities shown here include a holistic approach to country policy reviews to support clean energy finance and investment, technical assistance to support the development and implementation of clean energy finance policies, investor dialogues to help support the development of scalable pipelines of clean energy projects, and regional peer learning events. With less developed financial markets, emerging economies face even greater challenges to raise affordable capital to support their country's clean energy transition. The CEFM program will assist countries to overcome some of these challenges and help to create a robust clean energy finance and investment environment. Next slide, please. For us, digitalization will be an important enabler for this transition. Recognizing the growing importance of digitalization in our economies, the OECD has been examining how digital transformation affects policymaking across a large spectrum of policy areas. The breadth of the work is too wide to summarize here, but I'd like to highlight one recent report which looks at blockchain technologies as a digital enabler for sustainable infrastructure. The report looks at how blockchain technology can unlock financing platforms, provide visibility and alignment to climate goals through the provision of data and analytics, and how it can enhance awareness and access by acting as a transaction enabler of new market models. The publication is one of a number of case studies developed as part of the OECD's Financing Climate Futures report that looks at 6 transformative areas to align financial flows with low emissions, resilient infrastructure investments. One of these is innovation in technologies, institutions, and business models. Next slide, please. Achieving the clean energy transition will require unprecedented changes in the energy system. The figure on the left illustrates the future clean energy system, which is integrated across energy sectors and carriers, and a shift from centralized to decentralized energy systems. Digitalization will play a growing role in the energy sector, and the IEA's digitalization webinar series has already covered many of these areas. The transition also requires unprecedented changes in the financial markets. And as you can see in the figure on the right, we will also need to move from a centralized banking sector to one which is growingly more decentralized. Digital technologies offer innovative financing solutions to emerge. The webinar today explores how these technologies are starting to create new financing vehicles. Our three expert speakers will explain how blockchain technology can revolutionize the green bond market, how sensors and digital platforms are making it cheaper and easier to finance smaller scale energy efficiency and renewable energy projects, and how Indonesia has already used digital technologies to attract and raise capital from new investors. But before inviting our speakers to speak, we would like to turn our audience to have your input. Could I have the next set of polling questions, please? And if you have not already logged into the Menti system, the link and code can be found on top, can be found on top of your screen. So, our first question, what do you see as the leading driver for fintech development in the clean energy sector? As a platform to match project developers and investors? B, for verification and monitoring of performance of energy assets? C, standardization and an ability to aggregate smaller projects? D, demand for small investors to invest directly in clean energy projects? And finally, to use as tokenization to lower currency conversion costs. We will pause while people submit their answers. All right, so very interesting. We see about a third of the people believe that it'll be most useful for matching project developers with investors. That share is growing. At the start of the polling, many people felt that this would allow demand from smaller investors to invest directly in clean energy projects. And a smaller group feel that it'll be used for standardization to help aggregate smaller projects, as well as for monitoring of performance. And interestingly, nobody's looking at this for lowering currency conversion costs. Could I have the next question, please, on the screen? So the next question, what are the main benefits of digitizing green bonds? I encourage you to use or limit your answer to just 1 to 3 words. For example, for transparency, cost reduction, or increased access. Please submit your answers, and we will pause for a few seconds as the audience submits their suggestions. All right, so it looks like the 2 highest or the 2 most popular answers so far have been to help improve transparency and access, and also to help improve efficiency and raise awareness. All right. Thank you very much, everyone, for participating in this. Now, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Marianne Haar, Executive Director of the Green Digital Finance Alliance. Marianne, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Cecilia, and great to meet you, everyone. So this presentation will take a broader look at currently FinTech is redesigning the financial system. at instrument and at regulation level. So this will look at what are the opportunities to then also bring this redesign of financial instruments to innovate energy efficiency products. Next slide, please. It's important to also in the beginning highlight that Fintech also does not only bring opportunities to energy efficiency finance, it of course also introduces new risks, and especially the risk of that comes from the fact that the algorithms that powers these new financial instruments also have, for some of them, a significant energy footprint. I will not focus on the risk side in this presentation. In this short presentation, I will walk you through some of the opportunities to innovate financial instruments. And I have chosen today to share with you a number of the capabilities as the opening slide that Fintech brings to energy efficiency finance. I've sampled 3 of the main challenges where Fintech that are specific to energy efficiency finance, where Fintech has something special to offer. The first one is the relatively small size of energy efficiency assets and projects, and also the nature of the revenue models, that they are mainly based on savings rather than on following the building out of a physical infrastructure, and that demands different types of metrics for financiers. The second challenge is the high perceived risk cost, which pushes up both the cost of capital on energy efficiency projects and translate into a lower confidence at the level of financial service institutions. And then what Cecilia also mentioned, that it's less of a standardized market for financial products because of the fact that it acts differently. It cuts across existing asset classes such as transport and such as housing, etc. So some of the capabilities, the first cluster of capabilities that Cecilia also mentioned, and which is the obvious one, is the data, that we get more data and better data, especially that we now can get asset level data. And asset level data can make the financing models around these and the revenue models more tangible, but that the data can also be reported by the asset itself via IoT and intelligent chips directly in the assets, and that can be verified by logging it on to a DLT or distributed ledger technology. So that opens up for that we can make energy efficiency investments much more predictable, and that we can enable asset forecasting in entirely new ways. The second capability, which is important to address the barriers of energy efficiency finance, is the ability to aggregate. So that enables us to think about scaling finance in a totally different way. I think Cecilia also mentioned it, that we can aggregate at the investor demand side, so we can crowd in new types of investors with risk profiles that matches better energy efficiency finance, that have a higher risk appetite. But we can also aggregate at the energy efficiency asset level, and we can do it in new ways. So we can package energy efficiency assets across different risk profiles and then offer the investment as an average of the risk profile to investors. So we can actually cross-subsidize those that have a higher risk profile or perceived risk profile. The third cluster of opportunities is in the behavioral space, and that is both in relation to the data capabilities that it brings us to the retail level. So we can actually reward in new ways energy efficient behaviors via gamification, but also at the corporate level where we can much more clearly and based on impact data start to integrate energy efficiency impact into ESG automated ratings. At the moment, it's mainly when it comes to ESG labeled products, it mainly measures the corporate performance on a policy level rather than on an impact level. And also that introduces energy efficiency tracking in an automated and more cost-efficient way at the SME asset class level. Next slide, please. So over the next 5 to 6 minutes, I will take you through showing how these capabilities can open up new financing avenues. And I will go through 3 financing avenues, starting in the middle, looking at e-asset management, robo-advisory, and crowd financing. Then looking at green bonds, digitization of green bonds to unlock energy efficiency finance. And then looking at starting to build energy efficiency automated metrics into financial decision-making algorithms. Next slide, please. So if we look at aggregation of investors to crowd in more capital into energy efficiency finance, I have taken Germany on this slide as the example. because we've done quite a lot of deep dive work in Germany, and also because Germany is the country with the largest number of renewable energy crowdfunding platforms. If you look at the ESG or the SDG wheel in the middle, and you have numbers on each of the colors of the SDGs, that is looking at the entire fintech landscape in Germany, which is 700 plus fintechs, and looking at what percentage of fintechs deliver innovative financing for which SDGs. Then you can see on SDG 7 for clean energy, 16% of all fintechs in Germany actually delivers innovative financing solutions to clean energy. And if we look at that at the European level, then a few years ago, there were 23 active crowdfunding platforms for renewable energy across the Union, most of them for renewable energy access, but 17% of the platforms have also projects and assets for combined heat and power. 17% have for relighting and 9% for insulation. So some of them do include energy efficiency projects and assets. If you look at the main business segments that these innovative financing models are coming out of, it's mainly in the robo-advisory and it's mainly in crowd financing. And if you look at the main technologies that are currently powering these innovative financing models, then you can see that they are relatively on the graph. You can see that they're relatively low tech, or they're relatively light on integrating automated harvesting of metrics from the asset. Basically, you can see that they're pretty low in integrating IoT. So that would be a next step, and that reflects how it looks globally. So that would be a next step for further digitizing these. But to really scale crowdfunding for energy efficiency, there would need to be more blended financing vehicles. So bring in more concessional funding on these platforms, and bring in also institutional funding to really increase this financing vehicle. And especially that would be important for emerging markets, and also working on regulatory clarity of crowdfunding in a lot of developing markets. That's not necessarily the case at the moment. If we look at robo-advisory, then that's a segment of fintech that is scaling really fast, and also green robo-advisory. And what they do generally is that instead of channeling capital into smaller projects as crowdfunding do, what they do is that they crowd in retail investment capital into listed markets. So basically what's important if we want green robo-advisory to channel more funding into energy efficiency projects or ESG listed market, then we need to make sure that the ESG criteria also work on energy efficiency impact for this to be a scaling mechanism for energy efficiency finance. Next slide, please. The next slide is on digitization of green bonds, because energy dominates the use of proceeds for the green bond market. So you could ask yourself, well, why talk about digitization of green bonds? Because the bond market is highly digitized. In this context, I talk about it in relation to digitizing by using the second generation of technologies. So using distributed ledger technologies and using IoT and AI for automated harvesting directly from the asset. What you can see in the first step is that we did the state of the market of green digitization of green bonds by incumbents, and it's quite clear that that's just started in 2018, that blockchain-powered green bonds left the innovation labs of incumbents and entered the market. And then BBVA did an issuance of a digitized or blockchain-powered green bond in the European Union last year, but we haven't seen any fully end-to-end digitized green bonds and energy efficiency. But it's bound to happen with time. What has been holding it back has been a lack of regulatory clarity on crypto assets in a number of jurisdictions, but that is growing really rapidly, and policymakers and regulators are working on that. So this is an avenue to scale energy efficiency finance through rendering green bonds more efficient, and that is basically by automating the book building, by reducing settlement times from days to seconds, but also ultimately to automate the harvesting on data for the use of proceeds directly from the energy efficiency assets. What it opens up to is the second step that you see on the slide, which is to innovate green bonds with security token offerings for energy efficiency. And that is basically that it allows you to issue much smaller green bonds in a cost-efficient manner. And that would help us to overcome the barrier of the mismatch between the size of the energy efficiency asset and the needs from the investors. So it can crowd in new types of investors. We have seen in the first 10 years of last year, we saw 380 token offerings at a value of 4.1 billion USD. None of them were specifically for energy efficiency, but in the top 15, there was one that were related to the energy market, which was around IoT and automated transaction from IoT devices. Then lastly, it opens up for innovating entirely new ways of building projects that translate savings in energy into assets or into a currency. And there are quite a number of these in the markets, which are around that with smart grids, you can, your energy savings, you can sell them to your neighbor. So they basically become an income to you and become part of your own accounting. At the institutional level, it opens up for much more automated tracking of the asset performance and packaging of energy efficiency assets into more standardized financial products. Next slide, please. Then the most scaled fintech application across all markets is automated credit scoring. And when you look into what are the reasons for SMEs not to implement energy efficiency measures, that's been highlighted in energy audits, mainly access to capital and the cost of capital comes up. So what we are currently looking at and where we see great potential is to integrate green scoring into automated credit scoring, and that parts of these green scores will be based on the energy efficiency performance of the SME, and then making the cost of capital dependent on the energy efficiency and the green scoring performance. We're looking right now with my bank and IFC in China on exactly this, because we see that it's a great opportunity and a way for SMEs to get access to lower cost of capital, but also to be rewarded for really changing their energy efficiency in their production. And it can open the way for building of new types of green SME asset classes. Next slide, please. Lastly, behaviors at the retail level. There are quite a number of, they're not called energy efficiency mobile wallets, but there are a number of mobile wallets that build in now green functionalities, so that you as a user, we work with Ant Forest in China, for instance, that if you agree to it, then you will have 18 behaviors tracked. And some of these are about how energy efficient is your transport choices. And then you get rewarded by green points that you can then exchange for other issues. And they gamify your behaviors. So basically it uses network effects to establish green as the new behavioral norm. Next slide, please. So these were a number of avenues, some of them more mature than others, but I want to thank you for listening and looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you very much, Marianne, for your excellent presentation. I just want to follow up with one question, if I may. Does the digitization of green bonds help to expand domestic markets for clean energy finance, or are they more targeting international investors?
Well, at the moment, the ones we have seen issued have been globally, crowding global investors, and investors have been very, very interested. So those that have been blockchain powered have been oversubscribed in a very short period of time. And what the investor feedback has been from that is that it allows them to get much closer to the asset, because now you don't have to have investor meetings at regular intervals. You just get the information right on your smartphone on how your green asset is performing or your green investment is performing. But it is especially interesting for developing markets where you have thinner capital markets and where you really can leverage digitization of green bonds to change the perceived high risk of green bonds in developing markets. Because when you get automated harvesting of use of proceeds and proof of impact reporting directly from the asset, then of course that will have an impact on the risk profiling and the confidence in the instrument. And also because of the fact that in a lot of developing markets, the energy efficiency projects in agricultural value chains, for instance, are smaller, so they match better the smaller green instruments that digital opens up for. So I see the much greater potential for this in developing markets.
Great. And can you say a few words on the investors who are subscribing? Are these large institutional investors, or are these more traditional, perhaps retail investors hoping to get closer to the assets?
Well, if you look at the STO, so security token offerings, then it depends on the regulation. So if you are in the US, it has to be accredited investors. For a number of jurisdictions, you have to be an accredited investor still to invest in an STO. If you look at those green bonds that have been issued by incumbents, so by the World Bank, etc., BBVA, then these have been to a large extent institutional investors. There have been a few that have not been able, because of their own internal regulation about custodianship, for instance, not to invest in a blockchain-powered bonds, because it takes out a number of the sort of the role of the custodianship. So it still hasn't fully democratized the investment chain.
Okay, thank you very much. So now I'd like to turn to our next speaker, Jacob Noonan, who's co-founder of Kotakal Business Solutions. Jacob, over to you.
Thanks, Cecilia. So let me start with the first slide. Can we move to the first slide, please? So it's estimated that around 100 trillion worth of assets are invested in zero interest or less. And this is just the pre-COVID figures. And if you look at the other side of the equation, the project developers or projects that are developing clean energy projects, one of the main reasons cited for difficulty in implementing projects is access to capital and cost of capital, basically. So basically, these are the two sides of the coin. So through this presentation, I'd like to actually explore from our experience what were some of those reasons, and what are the ways that we can try to facilitate this to go forward. So in this slide, I'm just trying to set the context. So investors, when I talk about investors on one side, I'm talking about broadly project developers, project owners, state agents, etc., etc. And on the clean energy side, clean energy project side, I'm talking about when I'm talking about clean energy projects, I'm talking generally on project developers, project owners, state agents, and so on and so forth. And on the investor side, I'm talking about banks, financial intermediaries, and so on. So there are two different pieces of the puzzle, and the transaction is simple. Investor lends money as long as the project promises to invest in a specific theme or a class of investment. So that's the idea behind it. And the project developer promises to repay with full credit of his balance sheet based on the agreed terms. So this is basically the construct of how it is. Next slide, please. So what are the reasons that we have this dichotomy of funding on one side, or money on one side parked without any much returns, and on the other side, projects which don't take off? So we have sort of, in our experience with a few projects that we worked on, we found out three main areas. One is shortage of bankable projects. So what do I mean by shortage of bankable projects? So the investor and the project developer have different set of criteria that they use to access these funds. So the investor might say that it needs to fit a particular criteria, it needs to fit a geographic region, it needs to fit a particular theme, it should be probably only for solar, etc., etc. So there are some criteria related to that. That's one of the reasons. Second is there is an investor risk reward appetite. The investor doesn't want to invest in an emerging market. And again, the other reason could be that the project is in an emerging market, and they are not having the visibility or the ability to get funds from international markets. So there are that mismatch that happens, as well as the project credibility and the trust related leads to a shortage of bankable projects. The next idea is around generic funding that is available. So today, if you look at a benchmark figure or ticket size, it's around 100 million. If you go for a green bond, it's around 100 million, that minimum that you need to look at to have a interest from the bank. And any figure lower than that, the level of interest for the banks decrease as the numbers reduce. For smaller countries, a 20 million project does add value to their project development. So that's a little difficult to find. There's an aspect of transaction fees. There's an aspect of actually having the unit cost. So if you want to buy a bond, or you want to have an investor, a retail investor, invest into a product, can it be done with $500 US or $100 US? So the products that are in the market today are more targeting towards a specific set of clients. The other point is around the local projects that are there. If a municipality in Sri Lanka wants to put up a power plant, the local municipality would be willing to put the money in. There might be people in the locality who might be interested in the project. There might be expats from that municipality who might want to invest back into their country. So the options for that, plus the international investors, if they come together, there's a possibility for more projects to get off the ground. So this is one of the ideas around generic funding. The last one we are talking about is the opaqueness of the product itself. So, for example, most of these products issuance and the management of it is done by the stakeholders themselves. There's the transparency to the complete ecosystem is not always there. How the proceeds are used, how it has been tracked, and so on and so forth are not completely transparent. So these are some of these issues that we see in the market currently. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yeah. So with our experience with our customers, with these problems that we see, we use the tools that are available today to try to bring a solution to it. And we have used mainly three buckets of ideas around. So one is digitization, and digitization, Marianne talked about, not digitization one which is already available, people already do digitization, but across the life cycle of that project. When I mean life cycle, not only the funding part, but also the outcome tracking, meaning that you have a sensor or a IoT on the asset and are able to get that information from the asset into the platform and disseminate it to the investors on real time, all the time, right? So that's the first part. The second is around data. Blockchain, of course, provides the immutability of the records. So if you make a record, if you make an entry into the blockchain, it is immutable, it is date stamped, and it cannot be changed. So this is a very important aspect. We can actually use this for a lot of our business interests. The last one is about trust, and trust meaning that we have a very secure system which can be whereby we can do audit trails, and we can also do milestone based funding, because if you use sort of tools like DLT or blockchain today, you can actually trigger actions based on some criteria being met. And I'll explain all these three buckets over the next use cases that I have. That will be more easier to understand. Next slide, please. Okay, so like I said, we were talking about three main pieces to it. The blockchain, of course, immutable record. IoT, at the very simplistic way, it's probably a sensor which gets the information from the asset and writes it to the and we are able to write it into the blockchain. And then we have a smart infrastructure, the internet, Wi-Fi, and so on and so forth. One of the pieces that I've not mentioned here is the intelligence part, the AI piece. Once we have blockchain-enabled data, which is authentic data or data that is written or in real time, that information can be used to trigger business models and ideas beyond what we discussed as well. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, so let me just go through the cycle of financing that we have worked with some companies to fine tune. We have something called a pre-development phase. So pre-development is not it's a phase whereby the idea is formed. Idea for putting up a geothermal plant, for example, in Vietnam, is formed. Now you want to prepare the project for funding. So you have a bunch of requirements that need to be fulfilled. There needs to be a project plan, there needs to be a business plan, there needs to be approvals in place, etc., etc. And there needs to be some funding for that. That's let's say initial funding, a small amount to get it going. So in this case, what happened is that the project was actually funded by a grant from a development agency. And once that is complete, then the project can actually, and this takes over a year. During this year, the whole information is tracked and made available on the platform, so people can see the progression of that project over a period of time. So over 1 year, you can see that okay, this project has completed its governmental approvals, it has done its technical surveys, it has done its environmental clearance. So you see that information already before the project even comes in for funding. And over a period of time, that the audit reports, the government certificates, all are already uploaded, and the confidence level because of that increases to the investor. So after the pre-development, the project actually comes for funding to the investors, and at this point of time, it can be a green bond, it can be different instruments, but basically one already has the information related to that project, and the platform uses it to crowdfund that amount. The last part is project operationalization. Here, we are talking about not only automating the returns of well, if it's a green bond, it's automating the coupon rate distribution, but also the governance around it, the impact reports, as well as being able to real time see the amount of energy that is generated at the asset level. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about a few use cases quickly, just to give an idea. So this is the pre-development funding use case we talked about. So you have a bunch of tasks. So it can be secure permits and clearances. You have subtasks to it. You have a start date and end date. You have the owners for it. So you have a project management unit and Department of Energy in this case. And there are files for it. So if there is a local government unit endorsement, so you have a file that needs to be uploaded. That's a certificate from the local government that this project has been approved, and that can be uploaded as well. And the upload date and the verify date is also there. So this sort of project-based or milestone-based plan. Over a period of 1 year or whatever that time takes to finish the pre-development phase, already gives the visibility to the interested parties much before the project comes in for funding. I'd like to just mention one more thing here. Here you can also make payments based on achieving of milestones. For example, if you say that there is a multi-signature subtask or a task. Let's say the environment clearance as the environment clearance is complete, make a payment of 20% to the contractor. So you can say that this task, as it is complete, the certificate is uploaded and it is verified by the PMU and the Department of Energy, automatically make the payment of X amount to the contractor. So this kind of smart contract based automation is also possible. We have not really done it in the project, but it is something that we have tried it in a lab environment, and that works. Next slide, please. So the next use case we are talking about is a plain green bonds project. It's a green bond issuance that that is done for what we have found is at lower ticket sizes, which can be reconciled faster. You don't need to wait for T+1 or T+2, depending on the jurisdiction you are based in. The transaction fees are less. The project can list. They can the investors can find projects which they are interested in. They can invest, and the whole investment and funding operation can happen through the platform. Also, the other part is that the use of proceeds could also be tracked. So if you have $100 collected, you can actually have the earlier project management or pre-development tool customized to say that if the project finishes its 20% of its work, like for example, its clearance of its site, pay 10%. That can be done. So even we can take that pre-development and port it into this section, whereby we can add more level of transparency into the project. Next slide, please. So this is the third use case is basically a project discovery and matching platform. So here what happens is that you have investors who have different interests and have different areas where they would like to invest. So you can search by type, theme, or you can search by the coupon rate, the geographic location, whether you want to do energy efficiency projects, you want to do energy adaptation, mobility projects. So you can, we are providing a platform whereby you can search and find the information related to it. You can find the prospectus, you can find all details related to it, you can find the auditor's report, the information related to it, and you can decide on whether you want to invest or not. So this is just a project discovery and matching platform. We do it for both the pre-development projects as well as the funding projects or the main green bond funding sort of projects. So both these can be done as well. The last use case, next slide, please. The last use case is basically just showing how our water smart meter, which is a digital smart meter which we have done, is a digital representation of the smart meter that is there at the asset that is being tracked. So you have the energy that is generated from there. There is something called tokenization, which is basically a digital representation of the energy that is there. So if it can be done for physical items, it can be done for digital, and we have done it for the digital part. So we actually tag it to a token. So if you have 10,000 units of energy generated from a plant in Vietnam, that can be tagged as a token, and that token will show the proof of origin of that energy source or that energy. It can be traded, it can be, I mean, there are other things that can be done here, but I think broadly the idea is that we are able to track from the asset how much energy is produced over a period of time. Last slide, please. So what did we learn from this? I think this is the most important slide, I think, of the of the presentation for me. So there are project finance instruments available, but I think for the customers that we talk to, there definitely needs to be some customization. There needs to be some customization based on their needs, based on their projects and their context. So to give you an example, like I said, there's a 100 million ticket interest from a financing side, but maybe the project is only 20 million that is needed, and so that needs to actually cater to that segment. The second point is around a simple and transparent process. So today, if you have to raise funds, the process involves a lot of stakeholders. It's a complicated process. It's not so easy to just for anyone to just go and raise funds. We think that it should be, at least for smaller projects and for pre-development, for some types of projects, this can be simplified much more. Projects can be made bankable by making it simple, quicker, and then periodically the risk can be tracked so that the investors could also get a understanding on how the risk has been changing. So something similar to what the VC industry, the venture cap industry, has come out with a simple agreement for future equity safe from Y Combinator. It's a one-page document for funding for startups. Similar to that, something like that should be. We should come out with some instruments which could help us make it standard and help for us for the projects to go forward. And the last one is about blended finance for preparing the bankable projects. So here, like I said, we have this pre-development phase where we try to surface that risk as early as possible. And there's some funding, grant funding there. So if the financial institutions or the funders or investors are interested, could be participate in this project as early as possible and come out with these blended products, whereby grant or loans can be transferred to equity or transferred to investments, and then the whole project can be taken from there and sold to pension funds. I mean, I think there can be more flexibility in terms of the products that can be generated from such ideas. And we have all the tools for it. So I think this is the right time. And I'm glad to take any questions at this stage.
Thank you very much, Jacob, for taking us through how this platform is working. I'd now like to invite the IA team to turn to the Menti. We're going to ask participants to give us input on one additional question. Do you agree that fintech options are suitable for the following clean energy technology? So if you could vote on whether you strongly agree or disagree, whether residential rooftop solar, solar pumps, utility scale solar, green buildings, energy efficiency retrofits, efficient heating and cooling systems, and community battery storage are potential technologies that could use fintech options to help scale up finance. Excellent. We're just going to wait a second to allow people to vote. Interesting. So overall, all of these technologies, participants strongly agree that fintech can play a big role. On average, we're in the sort of 4 range. Interesting. All right. So thank you very much for these inputs. Encouraging to see that these digital options could really make a difference on quite a wide spectrum of clean energy projects. I'd now like to invite our last speaker to present, Ibu Dwi Irianti from the Ministry of Finance, Director of Islamic Finance. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Cecilia. Great to meet you, everyone. Here, I would like to share our experience in issuing green retail suku using digital platform. Next slide, please. To adapt with the the growing of commerce penetration in Indonesia shows fantastic progress. In 2017, we found 52.5% of Indonesia population as digital buyer, and it is projected to become 77.2% in 2024. The main factor that drive this digital buyers is the use of mobile phone. Approximately 76% internet user in Indonesia using their phone for online shopping, and this number is the highest around the world, with majority of internet users millennial generations that reach 17%. In the meantime, the growth of online retail reached 3.9% year-on-year in 2018. That background why we introduce the online system and develop this digital platform to issue our retail suku. Next slide, please. To adapt with digital trend and technology, Ministry of Finance has developed ESPN system. So the name of the system, we call it ESPN, Electronic Government Securities. Amazingly, that this process of developing the system, we utilize our own resources, especially millennial staff. So without involving any external IT providers, so costless in these things. This system, when we use this system, we found several advantages. First, it was 24 hours access from anywhere and anytime during the offer period. So people can buy from anywhere. And the investor just use their smartphone and can be accessed from in their own smartphone to buy our suku. And the other advantage that there's very convenient for investor because they don't need to come to the bank to buy our suku. And lastly, the system promotes fairness treatment to all investors because we use first come, first serve method in this case. Next slide, please. How to buy our suku? There are 4 steps, but before I explain about the steps, we appoint 28 selling agents consist of bank, securities, companies, and fintech companies. But all the selling agents should develop system that meet our digital platform and should integrate it to our system. There are 4 simple steps to buy our suku. First, the investor should create single investor identification or SID and also securities account. And after they get SID, they can start to put their order via agent's electronic system and need to confirm that they are fully understand of all the terms and conditions. So we put the offering memorandum documents in our system so investor can easily read the whole documents if they want. But usually they just skip this term and condition because they trust to the government that this instrument is very trusted, and they directly buy our suku. After they put their order, they will receive a billing code and use the code for payment. And after they get the code, billing code, they directly can doing the payment. And the investor will receive transaction number and notification of completed order. And before everything done for payment, they will get confirmation that their order will completed. After that, they will get confirmations for the ownership of the retail bonds through their emails. Next slide, please. Yeah, retail sukuk development in Indonesia, actually we have issued since 2009 with two types of instrument. We call it sukuk retail, which is the tradable one, and the other series we call saving sukuk or sukuk tabungan, which is non-tradable one. We already issued 12 series retail sukuk with total investor more than 300,000 investor, and we collect amount as 177 trillion IDR for retail sukuk. And for saving sukuk, we already issue 6 times with total investor 72,000 investor, and we collect 16 trillion IDR. Who actually buy our sukuk? Investor come from various professions. 55% coming from entrepreneur and private employees. 12% coming from government official. 10% coming from housewife, and 12% from student and retired, and 11% from others. And next, please. Next, this slide, I will explain about why the government issue green sukuk retail. There are several explanations. First, because we are aware that government very concerned with the sustainability of investor base. And the second, government of Indonesia puts a high effort in addressing environment issues. So the government encourage green activities to include it in our sovereign sukuk development. And lastly, green sukuk increase, we want to increase the level of awareness from individual investor, especially for the millennial, on climate change and environment issues. Next slide, please. Next slide, I would like to explain about our study case for our debut Green Sukuk Retail 2019. Before we issue Green Sukuk Retail 2019, we already issue green sukuk in the global market in 2018 and 2019. For the first issuance in 2018, considered as the first sovereign green sukuk in the world, and we already received 8 international awards. But green sukuk retail here we issue with 2 years tenure, with minimum people can buy with the minimum size 1 million US IDR, or equivalent only $72 US, and maximum size they can buy is around 3 billion IDR, or approximately 216,000 US. This instrument is non-tradable, and we found that during launching in November 2019, within 3 weeks, we gained an overwhelming response from investors with total issuance of 1.46 trillion IDR. And as Marin mentioned, for the proceeds of green suko, we use 100% to finance and refinance eligible green sector in accordance with the ROI green bond and green suko framework. In this case, we finance two sectors, which is resilience to climate change and energy efficiency. Amazingly, for this case, we tap new investor from millennial is more than 50%. New investor is coming from millennial. That's a proof that our online platform grab more millennial investor. Next slide, please. Here I want to show you the green projects that we finance from proceed of green suko, not only from retail suko, but we here we put example from global green suko as well. Here, three types of green projects that I put here. First is for energy efficiency projects. We finance for installation of smart street lighting integrated with solar power plant. And another example, we use of green suko to finance renewable energy project through mini hydro power plant. And the third example I put it here is to help increasing resilience to climate change through installation to smart public street lighting. Next slide, please. This is my last slide. From our experience in issuing green retail suko, we found several positive lessons from the online system in green suko retail issuance. First, this is new system is for green suko retail and using SID as a unique code. And this system also produce more categories of distribution agent, particularly from fintech companies, because from the offline platform, we only appoint bank and securities companies without fintech companies. But by using digital platform, we can tap fintech companies. This platform also increase book order from wider investor. We tap from eastern part of Indonesia, increase significantly through online system, because we can sell this through online, then people can buy from anywhere without restriction anymore. And online system also create more new investor, especially millennial generations. As I mentioned, about more than 50% new investor coming from millennial generations. And for last advantage that we saw from our issuance, we saw that increased level of awareness from individual investor, especially from millennial, and attract more green communities here, such as Trust Hero. So by using online platform and green platform, now we get in touch with Trust Hero. Trust Hero is a green community who concerned about using plastic for daily life. So they encourage people to use less plastic for daily life. Cecilia, I think this is the last of my presentations. I will be happy to take any question from audience or from you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for sharing your experience. I have one question for you. What advice would you give to other countries that were thinking of doing their own retail green bond issuance?
Yeah, having successfully in issuing green suko through online platform, I guess other countries should start from government initiative, because when the government have a new platform, then will encourage company, private company to do the same thing. For example, when we issue green suko in 2018, then followed by SOEs, they issue green suko as well. But for retail, hopefully they will do the same thing. So what I can suggest to other country, the government should take lead, and they have to do retail suko or retail bonds through online platform, and encourage people to do the same thing. And then I believe will be followed by corporate company.
Thank you very much. Now I'd like to pass the floor to my colleague Vida to take us through the discussion with the participants. Thank you.
Hi, good morning again, everybody. This is Annie. I would like to introduce you to the Q&A session. We are collecting a lot of questions from the audience, so thank you a lot for your interest and participation. We would also like to run in parallel, like to collect your inputs on the future work that we would like to have at the IEA and at the OECD. So we will then move to Menti and leave as a background, let's say, the opportunity for you to suggest anything if you'd like to. But now we will move on with the first question from the audience. Please, Vida.
Thank you very much, Amy, and thank you, Cecilia, and thank you to our three excellent speakers for providing such insightful information about opportunities and barriers. What I'd like to do is start off the discussion by zooming into some of the obstacles and barriers and ask all our speakers what you believe is the main barrier to the ability of fintech to scale up finance for clean energy, and what we can overcome, what we can do to overcome this obstacle. So please, if we could start with Marianne, and then followed by Jacob, and then finally Ibidwi.
Yes, thank you. I think the one thing would be lack of regulatory clarity on the regulation on a number of these underlying technologies, because the technology is there, but for a number of the markets where it will have the most impact, especially developing markets, especially the African continent, we currently have a lack of regulatory clarity, especially on distributed ledger technology. And we also have a lack of 5G rollout. So I think those two are the main barriers as I see them.
Thank you. And Jacob, please, from
your perspective. I think a bit of education also would help. I mean, in terms of the tools today available, because I think if the people, the government authorities, the regulators, the people who are involved in such decision making have the understanding and the ability to appreciate what these tools can provide, that would the transparency part and ideas around this this could actually help them to make an informed decision, and I think that this is going to help a lot.
Thank you, Jacob. And our perspectives from Indonesia.
Yeah, thank you. I guess, in my opinion, I think literation is the big thing. Literation to the people, how we can increase understanding from the people about the system itself, and then how we can improve understanding on and awareness how to do together to combat climate change and using energy efficiency. So I believe and we can do more for now, having digital platform such seminar, using webinar, for example. We can reach more people to socialize our program, for example, and give literations to people that government have strongly commitment to combat climate change, especially in using energy efficiency. And a lot of program in Indonesia now can be financed through Suko, and people now getting understand more for our programs. So, for example, we will issue more green retail Suko this year, as well as green Suko in the global market. So I think that one will help us and to get more finance to do more for climate change. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I'll hand over to Emmy for the next question.
Thank you. So one thing that I guess is really interesting both for us and for our audience is to actually contextualize this fintech evolution in the current COVID pandemic situation. So the question for all of you is, what impact do you think the COVID-19 pandemic will have on the development of fintech for financing sustainable infrastructure and clean energy projects? And if social distancing and confinement measures could actually help to accelerate the development, or if you expect that the economic slowdown will halt this development as projects are delayed. So I will hand it over to you, Marianne, first, then Jacob and Rianti, as we did before. Thank you.
Thank you. That's such a good question. I think there are a number of really important points. I think for one is that we're currently seeing credit quality decreasing. So for those types of rollout of renewable in Africa, for instance, we are seeing credit quality decreasing. So that will short-term impact the access of people to renewable energy. So there it would be really important that the government stimulus packages will enable these people to do at least some breaks in their down payments on their access to clean energy. I think what we are seeing sort of at the broader fintech space is that the large fintech platforms are increasing and they're getting bigger during COVID-19. The small ones are suffering and a lot of them are exiting the market. The big ones, so we will have more concentrated power in a smaller number of very large fintech players because of the fact that exactly social distancing, etc., and is increasing their relevance, and it's just speeding up digitization, speeding up historical processes, and we're seeing a lot more remittances, etc. So at the smaller innovator levels, we're seeing more disappear.
All right, thank you, Marianne. Jacob?
Yeah, so yes, of course, there is a lot of stress in the market from a financing standpoint. But I think it's also a good opportunity to look at this as a chance for us to invest into the future technologies, future itself, rather than invest in projects that are probably in the past. So this can be an opportunity to see which projects do not make sense at this stage, and then go forward to climate energy projects and so on and so forth. So I think that's the first point. The second point is today, especially for solar, I'm specifically talking about solar energy projects or energy efficiency projects. There are projects which have value in stopping the older energy sources or stopping the way that energy efficiency has been or energy has been handled, and actually investing into today and getting the returns for the next 5 years would probably be higher than going back to the old situation. So I think these discussions or these need to be reevaluated, and then investments could be made. This is what I feel.
Thank you, Jacob. And last, to Irianti.
Yes, I believe that green bonds are not immune to COVID-19 impact, and having experienced several years of strong growth, the global green bond market is expected to face major hurdles this year as the world continues to grapple with the economic fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic. However, I believe that as social distancing is a major concern right now due to the COVID-19, then a digital green suku, I believe, is a good solution then. And now in Indonesia, especially, people are ready for these situations, and they already know how to do and how to invest, and they already know that invest in green suku or green bond, they will get valuated on it, not only for profit in terms of finance, but also they will get for better future for their self. That's what I feel now.
Thank you, Irianti, and thank you all for your answers. Actually, we know we're running a bit over time, but we would really like to have at least another round, let's say, of questions for our speakers. So, Vida, please, you can proceed with the next one.
Yes, thank you all very much for your patience and staying with us. We want to take this opportunity now that we have such three great experts online to take the opportunity to query them further. So starting with Marianne, could you tell us a bit more about country experiences with the use of fintech for financing clean energy projects, and share with us some of the main lessons learned from these transactions and projects?
Yeah, most of the country experiences are in the access to energy rather than in the energy efficiency space, but there are a few that are in the energy efficiency space. One of them is in Germany. That was for LED lighting, and that was actually outside of Germany, and that was a crowdfunded transaction, which was for a public building. It was a 10-year maturity. I think the return was 3 to 4%. So that was for a public building where that was the energy efficiency costs were not part of the budget. So they managed to get it through crowdfunding, and that's we see most of the country experiences with these types of crowdfunding platforms are within the same jurisdiction. People want to be close to the project. So this was one that where it was more of a sort of ordinary transactions in the mind of the people. So it was just more about the return and making an impact. So what we see is that regulatory and policy environment is really sort of what triggers it. You need to have and you need to not have too much competition from concessional funding. That is extremely important. Then we have seen, if we move to the developing world, that is mainly rollout of energy access. So MCOPA, which is the most scaled rollout of solar energy, which is also a part of our alliance. It took them actually 7 years to start to make a profit. So it is a long-term game. And for them, they see them much more as a fintech company than as a rollout of renewable energy or energy efficiency company. So it's really about getting the fintech model right, but they have actually enabled deployment of capital into remote communities and now they are transitioning from sort of the impact investor base to much more sort of mainstream finance, bank finance, etc. So they have really exited into that. And if we look at energy efficiency on the African continent, we can see a number of them that are focusing on the agricultural value chain. And what is really interesting about those is that they have a high employment impact as well, because making the agricultural value chain more energy efficient has sometimes increases labor input. So it's a co-benefit solution. But also for those markets, working on the policy and regulatory environment is key. I'll stop here.
Thanks so much, Mariam. Emmy, I know you have a question for Jacob.
Yeah, so we'd like to move next to zooming in a bit more on the Asian geography. And actually, we would like to know from you, Jacob, what is the status of fintech for financing clean energy or sustainable infrastructure in India? And more broadly, which markets in Asia do you feel have the largest potential for using fintech to help scale green finance? And please elaborate on why is that?
Sure. So first of all, we use DLT as our base of our technology. So there is a the fintech is a broad term, and DLT is one way that you can implement, or blockchain DLT is one way that you can implement. There are the conventional ways of implementing it. So I think it's good to differentiate between the two. So the conventional way of normal servers and implementation of that is happening, and there are crowdfunding platforms. There is a there are some regulations in place from the Indian authorities as well on crowdfunding, but it is not really taken off in for the scale of the country and for the scale of the projects that are there, for various reasons. But if you look at from a DLT standpoint, from a blockchain standpoint, which is where there is a lot of value that is coming in, that is a bit more in an early stage, because there's a bunch of regulations that are needed, and when one talks about tokens or ICO or any of those aspects, then the regulators and the government are very very worried about those aspects of DLT. So from that standpoint, it's probably a little bit further down the road. But from the standpoint of in Southeast Asia, there are some countries who are a bit ahead from a standpoint of regulation, from a standpoint of acceptance of these technologies. So countries like Singapore come to mind, and there's more encouragement from those jurisdictions. This is a work in progress project. So I think that over a period of time, this is the information is going to be disseminated. People are going to see more projects coming online. They're going to see value, and over a period of time, this is going to develop, because the value is definitely there, and the value is derived even without any loss of credit using the same balance sheet. So there is definitely value, and it's only a matter of time. That's what I have to say.
Thank you. Yeah, and of course, like we will see how the situation evolves, as we said earlier, that the current pandemic is actually affecting the sector, of course. So we would like to move on to our next question for Ivo Dwi Irianti. So I'll leave the floor to Vida, please.
Thanks, Jacob, and thanks, Emmy. So our final question. Could you tell us a bit more about your plans? Are you, for instance, looking to support corporate, including financial institution issuances of green bonds or green SUCs? And if there are any plans to work together on an ASEAN level in this area?
Okay, thank you. Actually, for our plan to do more with blended finance, we already have Indonesian one plan, which is blended finance. We can do together to get more impact. The blended finance can be from government side through SUKO or bonds, and then we encourage SOE or private company, as well as we ask for a direct loan from other country to finance such projects to support energy efficiency as well as renewable energy. And as part of our innovations for SUKO, actually we have a program, we call it project-based SUKO. We issue SUKO to finance many projects, many buildings since 2013. And we think that in the next future, we will ask to line ministries to build not just building, but we will ask them to build a green building. So I think that one can support the program of renewable energy as well as energy efficiency.
Thank you very much for this information. And from my side, thank you to our three excellent speakers. I'll hand over now to Cecilia and Emmy to wrap up the webinar. And of course, thank you to all participants.
Thank you very much, Vida. And I'd like to thank the participants for their suggestions of future work that the OECD and IEA could undertake in the space of using fintech to support more clean energy finance. Our discussions today were extremely rich. I'm not going to attempt to summarize everything, but I would like to leave you with what I see as some of the three main takeaways from the webinar. First of all, fintech for clean energy finance is at its nascent stage, with only a glimmer of its potential seen so far. Country experience remains limited. The potential, however, for digitalization to transform the way clean energy finance projects are financed is extremely exciting. Secondly, blockchain and DLTs, IoT and AI provide visibility on data and analytics that can really help drive down transaction costs by facilitating standardization of smaller projects, making project due diligence easier and less costly. Fintech also allows greater access to smaller projects to raise capital at lower costs, and the provision of real-time performance data makes it easier for investors to evaluate risks and also leads to more confidence in project returns. And then finally, governments have a key role to play in developing some of the early projects and also in providing the right policy environment and governance structures that can really allow fintech to grow, but at the same time provide investors with sufficient protection and also information to make informed investment decisions. I'd like to end by thanking all of our speakers for joining us today and for sharing their experience and for their excellent presentations. I'd like to thank the participants for joining us and the IEA team for their support. I wish everyone well and good health. And now I'd like to pass back to Emmy for the final word.
Yeah, thank you, Cecilia. So once again, thank you all speakers, to our participants and to our colleagues who made this possible. I hope that this webinar was insightful for you all, and actually this is an exciting month for the year. A lot of events coming up that you can also find on our website calendar. But I would like to point out some of those. For instance, this afternoon, we'll hear about Voltali's experience on operating flexibility for more than 100,000 households in France. And coming up in the week of the 23rd of June, we also have our annual global conference on energy efficiency. A lot of prominent speakers there, and there will actually be the chance to participate remotely, which didn't happen, of course, the past year. So this would actually be a great chance to hear from thought leaderships on how energy efficiency is actually taking shape in the picture of economic recovery, and what are the current global best practices and partnerships. In the same week, we will also hold a webinar on energy innovations for the city of tomorrow, and our series of events will actually culminate with the Clean Energy Transition Summit, which will be a ministerial summit focused on this topic on the 9th of July. So please stay tuned on our social media channels and website calendar, and of course, stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.